So at this point, we're going to pick up where we left off at the end of Disc 2, which is to provide commentary of the clips from Disc 1 that help put into context and make sense of all of those wild events that are on the disc. You see, if you watch the evening news and you saw the highlights of the game played by your favorite football team, but the color commentator didn't give you a play-by-play, or at least have the final score on the screen, or tell you how many yards your favorite running back ran, or for how many yards your favorite quarterback threw, the clips that compose that highlight reel might fail to make sense to some without a little bit of commentary behind it. Now, some might criticize me and say, well, on disc number 1, why are there only clips? That's like asking a newscaster why he did not re-televise the entire football game. We're just trying to arrive at an account of what took place by way of examining the highlights. Do you want to hear dozens and dozens and dozens of hours of walking around, of breathing, of opening up refrigerators, things of that nature? Or do you want to get straight to the nitty-gritty and actually find out what the heck took place? If anyone has any questions or any criticisms in terms of whether or not these clips are actually true to the context of the overall recording from which they're taken, I challenge you here and now to bring your best. The entire library will be made available in its uncut form to any doubters or any sincere seekers of truth. You see, I, unlike Kathy and her supporters, have nothing to hide by the truth coming out in its most raw form. Matter of fact, I've wanted people to know the whole truth and ultimately to get her some help, and I've wanted this for many years. But also, on the other side, I did not want to embarrass her, and hence there was my dilemma. But since she's now committing the crimes of slander, of libel, of false police reports, of wrongful prosecution, and other crimes against me, and whether she admits it or not against my children, the truth is coming out, and at this point it's unstoppable. So here's where we're at in the commentary. And feel free to listen to Disc 1 again if you need to go back. So in the very next clip, you can see that she views her absolute right to take the kids away and make a geographical gap between them and their father as, quote, it's not kidnapping, close quote. She thinks that somehow being a cop equals having a law degree because she says, quote, like the officer said in this very house, close quote. Now, there was no officer and there was no conversation, but that's kind of how her mind works. She feels that, quote, a woman has full rights with the baby if the parents split up.
One has full rights with the baby if the parents split up.
Now, of course, this is legally inaccurate, but the kids, as you notice, are her bargaining chip. They're her method by which she manipulates me, because she knows that they're all that I care about. And that being the case, they become the only string that can be used by her to make me dance to her tune. So she will not give them up. Why? Because it'll be giving up the power trip and the control that she loves. Picture if a man was doing this to a woman and using the kids this way. Where's the outrage? In the next clip, Kathy says, quote, one day I'm going to crack. She is a can explode at any moment lady, and this is true. But when I ask her, what's left for you to do to me that you haven't already done, and I jokingly state that she's done every act of evil to me short of killing me, she responds, of killing me, quote, no, that's what you want me to do so that I can go to prison and lose all of my kids. She goes on to say that, quote, eventually you're going to make me do something.
Eventually you're going to make me do something?
Now, when a person who lives in the same house with you and your kids is discussing that they're, quote, going to crack, and that you're going to, quote, make them do something, because an abuser is never responsible for their own behavior. It's always their victim's fault when they blow. Worthy of, quote, prison, you can see that they've spent some time and thought in a really sick and really scary place in their mind. And when you combine the escalated speech with the recently escalated behavior and violence, you know that your time is running out and you'd better leave before this person either permanently hurts or even kills somebody. We could all sense that it was heading in that direction during this particular time period. The next quote is various explosions of Kathy saying, ooh, what the F is your problem? I'm getting tired of your B.A. She didn't like to be asked any questions or to have any other ideas that were not original with her brought up in terms of the direction of the family, things of that nature. The wind that you hear in that particular clip that's going into the microphone is actually footage of me running away from her and her running after me, trying to get her hands on me for the sin of asking questions. In the next clip, somewhere around this time, when I asked her to learn to control her threats to kidnap children, because she asked me what she can do to, quote, get better, her response is explosive. Quote, it's not kidnapping. If we split up, the baby goes with me. What the F is your problem? You like when I'm PO'd with you?
It's not kidnapping. If we split up, the baby goes with me. What the fuck is your problem? You like when I'm pissed off at you?
Her constant threat to move Jamie, my baby at that time, Kal-El was yet to be born, but the constant threat to kidnap my daughter and move her out of state was exactly what she would use to get control over the house. At the moment that she gave that particular quote, I felt that her over-dramatized and excessively loud behavior was a deliberate attempt to draw police contact to our duplex, and I attempt to get her to calm down. Why? Because in Anoka County, Minnesota, the most anti-male bigoted part of this part of the country, if a neighbor calls the cop and they're dispatched, she's going to act like I did something to her, even though I did not, and then I'm going to go to jail again for something that I did not do. And at that particular point in history, I'm on probation. She senses fear, she senses vulnerability, she senses weakness, and she likes it. It's her ultimate power trip. It's like a drug, and she enjoys every minute of it, like a sick kid who gets a thrill by torturing helpless animals. She goes in for a deeper attack and a louder performance for the neighbors by yelling, "No, Brian Shanley, you're a POS."
No, Brian Shanley, you're a piece of shit!
In the next clip, she finally comes out and admits it forthright. Quote, "I want to kill you." It doesn't get any plainer than that. I had nightmares about what the headline would look like and what it would read. I had nightmares about her getting off and being seen as not guilty because there was nobody to tell my side of the story, like that old propaganda piece film. What was it called? The Burning Bed? Sometimes I dreamt that she killed Gabrielle, my daughter. Other times I dreamt that she crippled Gabrielle and she was on life support and had to be in a wheelchair because Kathy broke her back or broke her neck. This was only on nights when I felt safe enough to sneak in around 4 hours of sleep. Most of the time I was up for nearly a week at a time straight through. In the next clip, again, she has another incident in which she has to say, quote, "Sorry for calling you an abuser. It slipped out of my mouth. It was wrong of me," close quote. Her lying about me in order to take the blame and attention off of her had become such a way of life that it slipped out of her mouth all the time. But once in a while, she actually acknowledged that it's wrong to lie about people. Thank God these tapes have survived, because today she's back to lying and calling me an abuser once again, and once again she's found a receptive audience to the whole performance with nobody in any area of society or life to ask her any questions whatsoever. People actually believe her. I just sit back and patiently wait for justice to catch up with her and for my kids to be safely reunited with their daddy. Jamie and Kal-El, if you're out there, I love you more than I love my life. In the next clip, she admits that, quote, "Yeah, I hit you because I love you so much." This is an abuser's mentality. I asked her whether or not she heard the words that came out of her mouth while she was hitting me, choking me, and slamming me against the wall. What she doesn't say is, "No, I didn't choke you. No, I didn't hit you. No, I didn't slam you into the wall." She says, quote, "Yes, I did," close quote. She punched me in my face. She punched me in my head. She punched me in my chest. She bit my leg. She bit my finger. And by her own admission wanted to, quote, "squeeze the living stuff out of my private parts." She admits that newborn Jamie was in the room at the time. One of her slaps hit Jamie, who was only a few months old at the time. The act that she committed against me of choking me was felony domestic assault, punishable by up to 5 years in prison. The punching, beating, biting, slamming me against the wall, etc., was another degree of domestic assault. Accidentally slapping a new baby was child abuse and assault against a minor. How many crimes does she get to commit without being called to account? In Minnesota, she has a blank check, unfortunately, especially in Anoka County. The next clip, when I mentioned to her that she beat me up, her response is, quote, "Brian, I don't care," close quote. She does not deny beating me up. She screams more. Listen closely at this point. In the background, you'll hear newborn baby Jamie crying. Why should she have to listen to this or hear this? Of course, if I tried to do anything about it, she would have called the cops. She had me so bound and so in chains, in a figurative sense, that it's quite remarkable. The next clip, she's bold and she's proud of her beating of me, and she admits that she did not go as far as she could have. Quote, "Kicked your A? I didn't do SH. That was light," I could have really worked you.
Kick your ass! I didn't do shit! That was right! I could have really worked you!
At that point in the clip, if you listen, you're going to hear me ask her if she thought that this kind of behavior and mentality was sick. Her response, listen, quote, sick? No, it's not sick, close quote. I asked her if, based on the craziness of what she was saying, she thought that she needed some kind of anger help. She responded in the negative. Abusers never think that they need help. Everyone else but them is the real problem. In the next clip, I asked if she'd ever beaten another man before, and she said, quote, Chris, close quote. This is a reference to a man in Iowa named Chris Baker. Kalen Baker is named after him, although he's not her biological dad. Kathy's musical dad's mentality is scary to me, since I have kids with her. But she reveals here that violence against men is something that she's done in the past before she ever knew me. And like she once said to me about why she hits me, and when explaining about why she beat Chris also, she gave the same excuse, quote, but that was because I was pregnant, close quote. So again, she's violent, but not responsible for her own behavior. Biological and hormonal factors made her do it this time. But the next clip is quite disturbing if you're listening to disc 1. Her paranoia comes back into play in our house by way of a horrifying threat. When seeking to explain why she just got done beating me up physically with a closed fist just moments before, she says of the beating, quote, because I'm mad at you and I really think you're cheating on me, and if you are, a woman would beat her husband for it and chop off his SH.
I'm mad at you and I really think you're cheating on me, and if you are, a woman would beat her husband for it and chop off his shit.
Now, what's interesting about this moment is, despite the fact that she would never allow me to leave the house alone except to go to work or to buy her some fast food, so long as I was not gone more than a few minutes, of course, she somehow had a paranoia that I was cheating on her. I remember one time a female bill collector called me to collect a bill, and she hit me with a dish because she thought the bill collector was another woman that I had on the side. I had to call in sick to work for 2 days and parlay that into an extended weekend in order for the bruising to heal somewhat so that no one would ask me any questions about it at work. You see, sometimes the victim covers for the aggressor, I guess. The phrase, chop off his SH, was a direct threat to castrate me. Where are the police? Where are the social services? Where are the courts? Too busy seeing this monster as a victim because their 1960s feminist prejudices demand that she's the victim. They're blinded to the truth by their outdated ideology. The next quote, being murdered in my sleep was a daily fear. Having Kathy, quote, secretly leave in the middle of the night, close quote, with baby Jamie was also a fear. I rarely slept and never had 8 consecutive hours of sleep during my whole marriage, except when I was in jail. Even though I'd been jailed for a crime that I did not commit based on her lies, and was there alongside some very serious and sometimes very violent offenders, I felt safer there than I ever did under the roof with her. The next clip, when discussing Jamie on this particular occasion, Kathy admits that, quote, I was going to leave her, close quote. She always discussed abandoning Jamie in order to get me to give in to whatever she wanted me to do. She was a master manipulator, and she would use our child in order to do it. I told her that Jamie needs a mother. Kathy's response was, quote, look at Gabrielle. She did perfect without a mom, close quote. Having Jamie be abandoned by Kathy was a pretty big fear of mine. Kathy knew it, used it, and played me like a musical instrument. You can hear the manipulation in action. Using your daughter to harm and control a person. Does it get more evil than that? Picture if a man was doing it to a woman. In the next quote, I mentioned that during Kathy's assault of me, she picked me up and was on the bed like I was weightless. She picked me up and threw me around like I was a rag doll. Her response was not, I'm sorry, I'll never do it again, let's get some help. Instead it was, quote, I can't help it that you're a lightweight.
We can't help you, you're a lightweight.
Now she went on to say, quote, just imagine if I was really PO'd.
Just imagine if I was really pissed.
Violent and no remorse. It's that whole, I'm bigger than you, I could have hurt you worse if I wanted to. It's that thing all over again. A veiled threat that I had not yet experienced Kathy's rage in its fullest form, and that I'd better stay in line if I wanted to avoid it. Later on, a cold-hearted statement of, quote, I'm not mental. Some people get hurt, Brian.
I
What? I'm not mental. Some people get hurt, Brian.
In the next clip after that, there's another revealing statement by her of, quote, I have no scapegoat when it comes to you, close quote. Now, we all know that a scapegoat is the object of some kind of anger that it had nothing to do with creating. It's just a thing on which you take it out. She's basically saying that she has no punching bag upon which to release her anger about life. So I get the job by default simply because of the fact that I'm there. I am who and what will absorb all of her anger, all of her hatred, all of her rage, all of her violence. Isn't that great? What a dream marriage. That's what I thought of when I walked down the aisle. She looks at me, she's reminded of all of her failures and sufferings in life, and now has her quote-unquote scapegoat in me. Listen to the first disc if you don't believe me. She said that. The next quote, Kathy on why she hits me, quote, the only reason why I hit you is because I get upset. And I really do care about you, and I've never cared about anybody in my life. And I learned from Dad that you're not supposed to love somebody so much that you do anything for them. And you know what? I got you. And the next thing you know, I'm twisted altogether because I never cared about anybody. And then when I met you, my head got swollen, and I'm so in love with you, and I couldn't help it, close quote. So the violence is meant to be a manifestation of love, if I understand this correctly. If this is not demonstrative of a need for therapy, then I'm not sure what is. She goes on to say that violence is, quote, the only thing I can do to get you to respect and love me, close quote. So the violence is a sick attempt to gain my love and my respect. Who taught her that violence is the expression of love? Could this be why she always wanted me to hit her and then got offended when I passively refused to put my hands on her? That's so weird, that's so sick, it's backwards. When will somebody finally step in and help this lady heal? Does she have to kill somebody? Does she have to destroy her children? Does she have to harm my babies? What is it going to take for the appropriate people to do the jobs that they're paid to do by our taxes and to do them correctly? What if she's trying to show love to my children in the same way? Love is manifested by violence? My children are doomed. The next quote, I mentioned to Kathy that the reason I pled guilty to a crime that I did not commit was because I was protecting her from the consequences that go along with committing the crime of filing a false police report. She doesn't, if you notice in the clip, she doesn't try to correct my statement with some alternate version of the events because she agrees that I'm speaking the historical truth about events as they actually happened. She agrees by saying, quote, I know what you did, close quote. When I mention the criminal background I now have that's going to follow me because of her actions, she says, quote, sorry. This is an admission of guilt. So once again, my name is cleared for my June 9th, 2007 arrest and my November 2007 conviction based on, and the reason that my name is cleared is based on the evidence by the words of my accuser's mouth. The next quote on that particular first disc, I asked Kathy if she's sorry for the fact that she'd just gotten done punching me. She doesn't say, wait a minute, I didn't punch you. The opposite, she says, quote, I already said sorry in the bathroom, close quote. I mentioned that she just slapped my face in the bathroom. Once again, her response is not, I never slapped your face. But rather it's, quote, yeah, because I really think you're up to something, Brian, close quote. So she admits to both punching and slapping me within the same quote. Both of these are different forms of assault, but tragically, they took place in Columbia Heights, Minnesota. They took place in Anoka County. So guess what she's going to pay for them? Nothing. Also notice in that quote, there's the paranoia. She always suspected one plot or another against her. I wish I had $1 for every time that I'd been beaten by Kathy because of some baseless fear or a non-existent conspiracy against her that she was trying to squash. That's really sick. The next quote, I asked Kathy whether or not she plans to call her counselor right now and tell her that she just committed an act of assault against her husband. Once again, Kathy doesn't deny that she committed the assault. She doesn't say, Brian, what are you talking about? Listen very close. She answers her counselor, quote, Brian, I don't have to tell her anything. She already knows by looking in my eyes, close quote. The next major quote that we see, Kathy admits about her behavior that, quote, I get frustrated and I hit you.
Get frustrated, I hit you.
It needs to be pointed out that on that particular day, my batteries on my tape recorder were low, so some of the voices might be more high-pitched. I've done what I could to try to fix them and make them audible. But once again, quote, I don't goat, close quote. So she has no punching bag to let her life's frustrations out on, so I get the honor of being the object of her wrath. She gets frustrated at life and hits me as her scapegoat. The next major clip, I ask her whether or not I've ever prevented her from the pursuit of friendships. She doesn't say yes. Why? Because I never have, and for once she's telling the truth. This is her opportunity to confront me about it. I just created that opportunity, and she's not shy. But she says, quote, it's not about that, Brian, close quote. So in other words, I've never hindered her from having meaningful friendships outside of our home. Her later revisionist claims and lies of me having socially isolated her are demonstrated to be a lie right here. One lie of many lies. How do you know Catherine Shanley is lying? Because her lips are moving. Are you beginning to see the pattern? The next clip, when I remind Kathy that she still has the behavior problem of lying, saying to people that I physically beat her up when I actually don't, her response is, quote, I never tell people that, and the only time I did was the cop, and I said sorry, close quote. This was a lie because she actually did walk around the community saying that I physically hurt her and her children. She still does it to this very day, and she's gained much attention, money, sympathy, free stuff, and she's done the whole Brian Shanley is a bad man world tour. When I reminded her that she just got done beating me up literally seconds beforehand, her response is, I don't give an F, Brian.
I don't give a Brian.
Beating people up and not giving a rip. That's quite cold-hearted. I don't understand that. The next clip, Kathy gets angry and smashes a glass pitcher that was given to her by her grandmother. The shattered glass slices my hand open, but I don't realize that I'm bleeding until later, after she calms down. The aftermath of one of her outbursts was always a discovery process. It was like her tradition to check for bruises, cuts, scratches, bite marks, etc. after one of her fits blew over. This was a way of life. Sometimes I didn't feel it while she was hurting me. I didn't always know that I was injured until later. Once the adrenaline rush of being beaten passed, I was then able to feel pain, and I was able to comprehend fully just how badly I'd been harmed. In the next clip from the first disc, there's me asking Kathy if I'm a violent person, and her response is a clear no. At this point in disc 1, in terms of the clips, I'm having a meeting with Kathy right after that very big and violent day, and I tell her, look, Kathy, you're a violent human being. I pointed out to her that she just got done biting my arm to the point that her teeth had touched one another through my flesh. She responded by saying, yes, I know. When I point out that my lips are swollen from the fact that she just punched me, her response is not, I'm sorry, I'll get some help. Her response is, they're not swollen. The next clip, it's October 2008. Kathy went after my daughter Gabrielle with a curtain rod. I stood in between them in order to stop this violence. Kathy then knocked me to the ground, went after Gabrielle, and started pushing her. Kayla and Casey Joe, they saw their mother's behavior, and they got involved, hitting me and hitting my daughter with curtain rods, various other objects, whatever they could get their hands on, just like their mother, screaming like lunatics. I pointed out to Kathy afterwards about that incident that we had an entire family battle royal. This is a pro wrestling term which describes a chaotic group fight. Kathy's not sorry for her violence, but rather her response is a cold, quote, it's about time. So she's not sad that she's violent. She's not disappointed that Kayla and Casey Joe followed her violent example. She's proud, almost as though it was a long time coming, and that her explosion was long overdue, and it should have been done earlier. When I ask her the logical question that follows this, which is, what's wrong with you? Her response is to blame Gabrielle. Now keep in mind that Kathy was angry because Gabrielle left her bedroom in order to get a glass of milk. I guess Kathy would have preferred that Gabrielle stayed locked up in her room all day and all night. But once again, Gabrielle is the person that Kathy blames. It's either my fault or it's Gabrielle's fault, but the recurring theme is that Kathy's never responsible for her violent behavior. She says, quote, you knew this was going to come.
You knew this was going to come.
In other words, it was inevitable. It was building to that point that one day there was going to be a big violent slobber knocker at some point. Peace was unattainable with Kathy around. She'd blow periodically, almost on a routine basis. Then we'd recover, and the cycle of building towards her next explosion would begin immediately. Sometimes in the days following, there'd be aftershocks, like the smaller eruptions following an earthquake. But we were generally safe from a major explosion of Kathy's rage for about a week, if we were lucky, sometimes up to 2. At the next point in the clip, I'm trying to reason with Kathy about her escalating violence that she says of my daughter Gabrielle, quote, she's been pushing the button and pushing the button and pushing it, and I blew. Hell yeah, I'm going to blow.
She's been pushing the button and pushing the button and pushing it. And I blew. Hell yeah, I'm going to blow.
So a 10-year-old fourth grader who by all accounts is well behaved and is not really a problem to anybody is actually the reason that you become a violent psycho. Really. Once again, deflecting the blame, it has to be somebody else's fault. This is Kathy's favorite thing in life. Raindrops on roses and whispers on kittens. These are a few of Kathy's favorite things, like the song goes. She cannot deflect it onto Gabrielle anymore today in 2012, so who does she deflect it onto? Me. Everything that she is and that she was, she tells the community, she tells social services, she tells the courts that I am. Now I asked Kathy if her behavior towards my little girl, in 4th grade at the time, you got in her face screaming, did you or did you not? To which she responded, yep, yes, and I will do it again if she doesn't learn her place.
Yes, and I will do it again if she doesn't learn her place.
At that point in the discussion, on the first disc, I asked her if I, as a father, have a right to be concerned as she chased my daughter up the stairs and grabbed a curtain rod, especially given Kathy's violent and brutal history with us. She said, you have the right to be concerned, but...
You have the right to be concerned, baby.
The word but grammatically serves as a conjunction which introduces a change to the direction of the discussion, and she always followed that. She would admit something and then use but and follow it with either an excuse or a deflection. So I beat you up, but here's why. You have the right to be concerned, but here's why. Or, yes, you have the right to be concerned, but it's someone else's fault. So but the point here is that Kathy admits that I do have a right to be concerned when she's chasing my daughter with a curtain rod up some stairs. That she acknowledged that at that moment I had a right to be concerned is my best indicator that she had it in her heart to do my daughter bodily harm on that day. At the next point in the clips, I ask her if she's afraid of me, and her response is, quote, no, not yet. In other words, when she attempts to pass herself off to the community and to the courts and to the church as the victim who needs to be afraid of me, she's lying. And the, quote, not yet part of her response is because she was always anticipating a future, a coming big climax. Deep down inside, she wanted me to respond to her violence with violence of my own. I think that she looked forward to that day and was disappointed as the years rolled by and it never came, no matter how much she escalated her evil. Kathy, at 28 years old at the time of this recording, thought it would be fun to push around a then 10-year-old 4th grade little girl. But that little girl pushed her right back. And Kathy, used to being a brutal tyrant who was never physically opposed by me, was actually shocked at being pushed back by my daughter. She did not respond by saying, Gabrielle fought back against me, but rather she twisted it all the way and said that, quote, Gabrielle threatened me.
Talking to Gabrielle, and then she threatened me.
Ooh, nothing like being threatened by a 4th grader, you know, by an itty-bitty little elementary school kid. But you see, when you're used to running the house with an iron fist and then someone one day pushes back, you would view that as a threat of a kind in that your power trip is being threatened because your ability to instill fear in people is starting to slip away. But when she used the term threat, I want it to be clear that she was attempting to create a reason that she could later grab onto to assault my daughter and then later on paint herself as a person who was defending herself, you see. This is a sick mind indeed. She was premeditating a future fight with my daughter and trying to set up a reason to do it. The next clip, Kathy begins trash talking at this point, looking forward to a coming hopeful future physical fight with a then 10-year-old little girl. Kathy says of my daughter Gabrielle, quote, she swears up and down that she could take me and all of this stuff. And you know what? The day that she thinks so, I will be right there.
Swears up and down she can take me and all this stuff. And you know what? The day that she thinks so, I will be right there.
Tell me the sick, twisted freak who looks forward to the possibility of a fight against a child. And what judge gives kids to a person like this? What guardian ad litem recommends that kids go to a person like this? What church lets a person like this work with their infants and toddlers? Who hires a person like this as a PCA? I had to throw that out there. That's what's happening in the community. I think you need to call the numbers I mentioned in one of the previous tracks. The next quote on disc number 1, the next one of significance, I say to Kathy that you pushed her. You pushed a child. Pushing anyone is a crime. Pushing a child is also a crime, and it's abuse. Her familiar response, once again, is, quote, yes, and I will do it again if she doesn't learn her place. The concept of putting people in their place, keeping people in their place, is a control technique. I would imagine that she got this from Barbara Bogus, her foster, quote-unquote, mother that she grew up with. Keeping people in check, keeping people in line. That's how you keep control over a house. She's a control freak, and Gabrielle, standing up to her one day, was a threat to the control. Now, she goes on in that same clip to say of a 10-year-old elementary school, keep that in mind, quote, she's lucky I didn't punch her out of her lights.
Like I didn't punch her out of her lights.
Now, this is a reference to the cultural, the idiomatic expression of punching her lights out. But Kathy has a tendency to speak broken English and even other dialects in which she has no training when she's really upset. Let me ask you this, the hypothetical, what if a man married a woman and said of that woman's pre-existent daughter, she's lucky I didn't punch her lights out? Would anyone with any sense be rushing to defend that man, to get him paid bi-weekly by the people that he beat up? Welcome to being a male in Anoka County, Minnesota. The next quote, when I tell her that if she hit my daughter, she'd be in jail, her response is, quote, I don't have to be in jail because you'd be the one who gets in jail before I will, close quote. And I did not fix that so as to correct the grammar. You can listen to disc 1. I can't play every clip for you. But this statement is an indicator that a light's going on. She's having an epiphany. She's in the midst of it. She's starting to smell at this point how protective Minnesota is going to be of her on the basis of the fact that she's a woman, in order to cover for her behavior, in order to provide some kind of explanation that has nothing to do with herself. It has to be something external, or it has to be my fault. But it also teaches her how Minnesota is going to ultimately discriminate against me on the basis of the fact that I'm a male. She's waking up. She's becoming conscious of how the system works up here, and she's preparing herself to use it in order to keep me in my place. That's a precursor of future events through which we're living right now. The next quote, despite the violent speech, Kathy then tries to sell me on the lie that she had no violent intentions toward my daughter. But in a very revealing moment, Kathy acknowledges that due to her past behavior, I had good reason to fear that she was going to do something physical to my daughter.
Because you have a history with me. In the past, you thought I was going to do something physical, but
So she admits that a violent past track record and a past performance in which violence and brutality was a daily expectation, that on that basis I had good and sufficient reason to fear that this would be a pattern that could possibly indicate future behavior. And since she was already pushing my daughter, and that was physical, obviously I had reason to be upset. I'm glad she admitted that much, at least. Disc 1. I'm on my knees in the kitchen, tears running down my face, and I'm begging Kathy to please get some anger management help, get some therapy. I pledge as a loving and loyal husband that I'll support her however I can. That's one of my weaknesses. I would be willing to go down with the Titanic in every attempt to try to keep the marriage afloat. Her response, once again, is, quote, you can't support me because you can't put your child in check, close quote, as I try to get her to digress back to the original issue at hand, which is her violence, though she liked to blame either myself or my daughter for her behavior. I remind her that this is not about blaming a child, it's not about blaming children, but rather it's about having a better environment and a better quality of life for them that does not include violence. But her response to me saying this discussion is not about children is, quote, want to bet? So she's a diehard clinger to the idea that her bloodthirstiness and her anger is everybody else's fault except her own. She goes on to say of my daughter Gabrielle, quote, "Then learn her place. That's all I can say." Close quote. That sums up Kathy in a sentence. Everything that I am, everything that I do is someone else's fault, and that's all that I'm capable of saying. At this point, I offer my support to her in her pursuit of therapy, and she snaps back, quote, "I don't need your support." Kind of like getting an alcoholic or a drug addict to go to treatment. You're going to have an uphill battle, and that's what I had. She then says of what she intends to get out of any counseling that she ends up in, quote, "So I can find ways to overdeal with her mouth," close quote. And again, I'm not correcting the broken English. That's how she said it. I point out that she's blaming other people because of the fact that she's violent. At this point in the discussion, I attempt to illustrate to Kathy how serious her need of help is by pointing out what just happened in that family battle royal. And just to recap, here's how it came about. Gabrielle committed the crime of coming out of the bedroom to get some milk. Didn't she know that Kathy saw her as the red-headed stepchild who needed to stay locked in the room? How dare she come out? But anyways, Kathy got angry at Gabrielle without being provoked, and Gabrielle simply ignored her. It's very sad and speaks volumes about who you are and where you're at in life when a 10-year-old is too mature to deal with your childishness. Anyways, Kathy then chased Gabrielle up the stairs, grabbing a curtain rod, and starts pushing Gabrielle. And of course, I get in between them in order to protect my daughter from a person who had a history of assaulting me. Kathy, of course, throws me to the ground like I'm weightless, like I'm nothing. And then she pushes Gabrielle. But Gabrielle snaps and pushes right back in defense of herself and her safety. Kaylin and Casey Joe, who are Kathy's two pre-existent children, they see this mess and they're like, order is broken down, it's Christmas, there's no rules. And they started emulating their mom. They started acting like their mom. They grabbed whatever they could. They started... This is Brian James Shanley, and you're listening to the fourth, and I promise that it'll be the final disc in the album by Gabrielle Shanley, which is entitled Monster. I was initially only asked to make a brief cameo appearance, but as it has unfortunately turned out, I'm actually doing a great deal of the talking. Yet, Gabrielle, my little girl, is going to retain the credit for this project, as it was her dream, her idea, her vision, if you will. She literally started the project without me, and, even further, against my wishes. She viewed this as a story that needed to be told. She saw her name and my name as reputations that needed clearing. She saw the truth as something that needed to come out. Now, these discs, I do admit, they contain a lot that's dark, a lot that's ugly. There's four-letter words, there's acts of violence, destruction of property, crimes against children, lies, threats, and so much more evil. I couldn't even give you a full list because I'd probably leave something out. And those horrible things are performed by Catherine Shanley or Catherine Bogus or whatever she's calling herself, the one after whom Gabrielle has named this album, Monster. But really, this album is actually light and it's actually beautiful in terms of its ultimate message. See, it's ultimately a love story between a father and his children. It's a love story between a teenage girl and her baby siblings. What would you go through? What would you endure? What would you suffer in order to remain in the lives of itty-bitty little ones who look up to you? We've suffered a great deal to stay in these kids' lives. We've been lied about. We've been mocked. We've been beaten. We've been bruised. We've been made to be afraid. We've been made homeless. We've had to endure the insult to the human intellect. That is, having to have conversations with Anoka County's so-called Child Protective Services. We've had to deal with crookedness in the court system. We've had to deal with stupidity in the guardian ad litem program, quote-unquote, that my taxes pay for. Back in the day, they used to be volunteers, but now they're pros. We've had to violate our conscience and sit before secular psychologists, a pseudoscience that we don't even believe has very much value at all because it's so subjective and so inexact. We're normally conscientious objectors to this goofy thing. In the last decade, 8 out of 10 people who robbed banks wore Nikes. You're wearing Nikes. You share in common with many who rob banks the same behavior pattern of preferring Nikes. Therefore, because of our observation of the fact that you're wearing Nikes, well, we put you in the category of a bank robber. That's your diagnosis, you see. It's about as goofy as you can get. Sigmund Freud, the German rationalist who was a pervert, who was in love with his mother, who had race relations problems, who was a cocaine addict, he was the father of it. It's all based on generalizations. They're trying to find out what box to put you in. There are a finite number of general rules or profiles that you can throw a person into after talking to them. It's like going out to eat. There's only so many things on the menu. How do you determine what box to throw who into? Well, by subjective things like what you say, how you sit, how you dress, eye contact, etc., what you see in the ink blot. When you admit that there are many exceptions that are actually out of step with the general rule and the box they want to put you in, then you by definition are faced with a scenario in which you have an inexact science in front of you. If somebody wants to do it, hey, more power to them. This is America. You got the freedom to dabble in that kind of thing. But if somebody wants to use it as though it's exact, as though you can take a blood test, oh, this person's nuts, give me a pound of mental sickness in my hand. If they want to use it in collaboration with the court system, which is a branch of our government, in order to rob people of their freedoms and their rights and their property, then we've entered into the world of fascism. This is not only un-American, but it's highly dangerous. Everybody who disagrees with the state position on a subject is declared to be mentally sick. The Gestapo and the white coats need to give us the generalization or the diagnosis that they've decided to tack onto you, so we can pretend that our stomping on that person's freedoms is actually scientific. We want to dress our control freak behaviors in scientific clothes. It's a crock, you see. But we've talked to people like this, and we've tried hard not to laugh. We've also tried hard not to cry, as more often than not, the people have already had their heads filled with Kathy's lies about us before even meeting us, so that what we say or how we conduct ourselves actually in the grand scheme of things matters very little. It's already been decided. It's kind of like going to the fair and playing a rigged game. You ever played the rigged game? Maybe you got to shoot the basketball hoop, but when you look at it from the side, you find out the hoop is actually not a circle so much as it's an oval designed so a basketball could never fit in it. From your angle, it looks like you just can't shoot, without regard to how good you really are. It's been set up ahead of time so that your winning is impossible. But in this love story between myself and my children, between my oldest daughter and her baby siblings, we hope that you're actually inspired by the courage, the patience, the endurance, and the long-suffering that only a trust in the person and work of Jesus Christ, as he's revealed himself in the Bible, can produce in a person. Because he is the one who has given us the strength, the energy, and the motivation to press on, even when it looked as though the game was over. Many anti-male and anti-children and anti-family bigots in this whole system are actually angry about the fact that as we sit here now in June of 2012, 2 years later from the time they started trying to mobilize against me, both myself and Gabrielle are still viable. We're still in this fight. They're frustrated that we've not yet waved the white flag and surrendered a long time ago. They wonder where the drive is coming from, where the endurance is coming from. Maybe they think that we're superhuman. But the efforts are now being doubled in 2012 in order to make sure with absolute certainty that myself and my daughter Gabrielle are stomped into the ground once and for all time. But we won't be. Kathy, if you're ever hearing this one day, and I know you will, first of all, I want to give you an apology. I'm truly sorry that I've been backed into this corner, and especially a corner of this kind, not of my own making. You know full well, whether you admit it or not, the person that stares back at you from the mirror definitely knows it, that I spent so many years trying to keep you from experiencing any of the consequences of your violence and your control issues. But today you've crossed the line by lying to the community, by lying to the church, by lying to the cops, by lying to the courts, saying that everything you did to me and Gabrielle is actually me that did it to you and Kaylin and Casey Joe. You're even trying to involve Jamie and Kal-El in your hustle and in your scheme. I don't know what about our history together makes you think that I'm just going to roll over and die so that you and the atheists, the communists, the perverts, the socialists, the terrorists, and the lunatics in the Child Protection Department in Anoka County can destroy my children. But you're about to learn that, though you were unsuccessful in drawing me into a physical fight with you, no matter how hard you tried and how much you beat me, I sat there and took your best shots, and I'm still here, and I know that bothers you. I will enter into and I will win in a spiritual fight against you. But as Ephesians 6 says, I'm not actually up against you personally so much as I'm against those forces that are guiding your wicked behavior. P.T. Barnum once said, there's a sucker born every minute. Well, in Anoka County and in Fridley and in Columbia Heights, Kathy must have found all of them. I cannot think of a better note on which to close this particular part of this disc than with Shakespeare. In Hamlet, the quote is something to the effect of, "O pernicious woman," and this is a reference to the queen who had her husband murdered so that she could fulfill her own political agenda. It then goes on to say about her, one can smile and be a villain. One can walk around the neighborhood and around the city and put on face A for the public, but the reality behind closed doors when no one is looking is actually face B. And that face B that Catherine Shanley or Catherine Bogus has on behind the closed doors, as you hear on these albums, is actually a monster. But the monster is who she really is. The person you see smiling and kissing babies in the public is a performance. It's a hustle, and you've been suckered and you've been conned. Let's press on. At this point, we're going to go on with the commentary from all the clips on Disc 1 so as to furnish you with the context of what was taking place during those clips so that things can start to come together for you. If you're a member of Congress, if you're a member of the media or some other place of influence and these discs have found their way into your hand, I want you to know something. As I've functioned, had the privilege of carrying and defending the Christian gospel message before a lost and erring human race, and glad and honored to do it. One thing I've learned about human nature is that for those folks who love lies, truth coming out can be quite inconvenient. And that being the case, as these discs make their rounds and they get further and further out into the culture, I fully expect some kind of an attempt to suppress or discredit them. And I want you to look around and just see, has someone suppressed or tried to stop you from listening to them? If so, the question then is why? What are they trying to hide? See, only people who have something to hide would stop you from an examination of the evidence. Someone who has the truth on their side doesn't care about a full inquiry where every single card is laid on the table. Kathy has had 3 years plus to walk around the community, actually 5 if you really want to get down to it, 5 years to walk around the community and paint whatever picture she's wanted, and she's been unopposed. And this is the first time that there's a little bit of opposition. This is the first time that another side of the story is coming out. And so yes, she being the controlling person that she is, and those people who are around her for whom the truth is inconvenient to their agenda, they will make an attempt to say, hey, don't listen to that. That they're trying to do that should make you all the more curious about why. And I'm asking you to burn these albums, the whole 4-disc set, and get them in the hands of everybody that you can, and you let them know that this is the person that Anoka County, the family court system, and the so-called Child Protective Services, and the Guardian Ad Litem program of Minnesota all ignored the Minneapolis Police Department, the Minneapolis Child Protective Services, the Stearns County Sheriff, the Albany Police Department, Stearns County Child Protective Services, Brooklyn Park Police, Columbia Heights Police. Everything was ignored, and they looked through the narrow tunnel vision at only those things that were convenient. We're talking about a Guardian Ad Litem report that will take a report that's 40 pages and select 2 pages out of it and put it into the Guardian Ad Litem report. I like a few pages of this police report. I like a few pages of this report. And they put it all together without an examination of everything. I challenge you to go down to the Hall of Records in all of the various counties I've mentioned and look at the records in their entirety. I have nothing to hide. And I think that my daughter Gabrielle, nudging me, elbowing me, sometimes friendly and sometimes not as friendly, because I'm the daddy, but her pressing me on to actually come out with this and provide an alter. I always had the silence is golden kind of approach to this whole thing, as in these lies don't even merit a response. It was Gabrielle who said, Daddy, by staying silent, it's almost like you're agreeing with them. It took a minute for that to sink in, but my daughter's right, and I couldn't be prouder of her. That's my little girl, and I know that God has a wonderful plan for her life. We're going to go on with where we were at in the commentary here. Family Battle Royal. I was setting up how it came about. Basically, Kathy was beating everyone, beating me, beating Gabrielle, pushing Gabrielle rather, suffocating Jamie, who was 11 months old at the time, although Kathy admits now that I don't remember that. I'm the one that had to lift her off of my daughter who was screaming for her life. Anyways, Kayla and Casey Joe saw this behavior of their mother, and they're like, okay, order's broken down, it's Christmas, there's no rules, and they began emulating their mom. They started hitting me, they started hitting Gabrielle, with whatever they could get their hands on. I pointed out to Kathy how dangerous this example was that she was living out in front of her children. Her response was horrifying. She said, quote, they thought that by protecting their mother, they had to do it.
They thought by protecting their mother, they had to do it.
So this is very interesting. Reality was A, but she had convinced her mind that it was actually B. This is mental sickness. You see, you attack people, then you see yourself as the one in need of protection. Again, somebody help her, and somebody deliver my kids out of her hands and deliver them back to their daddy where they belong. I'm begging you. At the next point in the clips, I attempt to bring her back to an objective reality into the world in which we actually live, so that she can hopefully choose to see the explosion that just took place for how it really was. I again point out to Kathy that her violent behavior is something that affects the kids, and that whenever she's violent, they always copy her. Her response is to see reality different than how it actually is, and state once again, quote, it's called protecting, close quote. Hurting everyone, causing destruction, and being violent, and then casting yourself as the victim is a behavior that to this very day she still has yet to get rid of. And conveniently enough, it just so happens that she lives in a county, she goes to a church, and she sues me in the courts of the one community in this part of the country who will actually, rather than see her as the person who needs help, actually enable her by taking her skewed and her twisted accounts of things seriously. The rest of the world can see plainly what we're dealing with in Kathy. Why can't Anoka County, or better yet, why won't Anoka County? The next clip, I passionately, with all tears, tell her that while anger is a human emotion that people feel all the time, how people express it, how people use it, is actually the determining factor as to whether or not they're healthy. I tell her that she's got to get help, and she's got to get it now. I point out that there were neighbors knocking on our door because they could hear down the block Kathy screaming at myself and Gabrielle like a maniac. Kathy's absolutely unaffected by this and lacks the ability to see how serious it actually is. Once again playing the victim role because the reality of her being the aggressor is too unbearable for her to face. She says, quote, yeah, because my daughter thought I was going to die.
Yeah, because my daughter thought I was going to die.
This is a reference to Kaylin, one of her two developmentally disabled girls that Kathy has been the chief influence on, running outside while laughing the whole time, mind you, and under orders from Kathy, yelling to the neighborhood, quote, somebody's killing my mom, close quote. Kathy had sent her to do it during her episode. What she was trying to achieve was to draw police attention to our house. The police were the pit bull that she would sick on me in order to keep me under her thumb. Fridley had trained her that this is what they were going to do, but only Fridley was fooled by her. Minneapolis was able to see through her. They never took her bait. A couple of officers in Columbia Heights knew exactly what was going on here. The Albany police knew exactly what was going on here. Brooklyn Park police knew exactly what was going on here. Most normal cops must be trained to spot Kathys or women like her and see them for who they really are. Maybe Fridley needs to sit in on different police training. Now, I mentioned to her that because of her violence, I'm afraid to come home from work every day. Her response is, quote, good. And I was too blinded by love at the time to see it. But me being afraid is exactly what she was trying to achieve. Matter of fact, by telling her that she'd accomplished her goal and that she had me right where she wanted me, I was only encouraging her to keep this behavior up. A couple of years removed from it, many hospital trips, many hours of contemplation later, I'm able to see it more clearly from this vantage point. As I tell her that everybody in the house deserves a better quality of life than this violent one, her response is, quote, "Want to hear mine?" Close quote. She's stone blind to the fact that anyone exists outside of her own needs and her own wants. It's kind of like talking to a very big child. Herein we have a woman who just moments ago had tried to assault a 10-year-old girl. Her husband stood in between them to prevent it. She pushed the 10-year-old. The 10-year-old pushed her right back. Kathy threw me to the ground in order to remove the obstacle standing between herself and harming the 10-year-old. Kathy's 7-year-old and 9-year-old begin hitting myself and hitting Gabrielle with various objects. One of them must have been metal because I had a lump on my head. Kathy tells Kal-El to run out into the street and to get help for her, although she's the one hurting everyone. And in the process, Kathy falls on top of and smothers 11-month-old Jamie for several seconds. Kathy weighs about 250 or 225 at this point. Jamie's kicking and screaming for her dear life. Just a baby. Kathy's unconcerned. She only sees red because she's trying to get Gabrielle. The only time in life that I ever put my hands on Kathy was, number one, to get her off of my 11-month-old daughter, Jamie, whom she was suffocating and didn't even care. The second time was to restrain her hands as she was attacking my 10-year-old daughter with a metal curtain rod. But in all of this horrible destruction, Kathy is both angry and trying to control the house, but also clinging to a weird form of victimology at the exact same time. It's as though there were two Kathys. You had the private one, which was a violent controller of the house and a mistreater of children. And you had the public one, which had a beautiful smile, a sweet and innocent victim who does volunteer work for churches. Her response, as I try to tell her that everybody deserves a quality of life better than this one of violence, is a cold, unapologetic quote, "Then be a husband." Everyone deserves a quality of life better than this.
Then be a husband.
When it comes to her violent behavior, first it was Gabrielle's fault, now it's my fault. Everybody's fault but Kathy's. Sick, sick, sick. Can't you see it? What more do you need? I try to tell her that we've all been very patient, we've all been very accommodating as she adjusts from a horrible childhood where she grew up in a foster home where she was mistreated and try to adjust to having a normal family life. Everybody in the house has been very understanding for, at this point, it was years. I tell her that I understand her past, I understand having a screwed up childhood, and that I also understand that she still carries some of it around, and some of it still influences how she behaves and how she handles problems. But I also tell her that her behavior is destroying her family and that she's losing her family. Once again, her response, without apology, is, quote, "So be it." Losing her family. So be it. Yeah, by this point in the conversation, she had figured out that the people in North Minneapolis don't believe in police heat being attracted to their block and their neighborhood, and that nobody was going to take the bait. Nobody was going to have the police show up at our house. Nobody was going to have me arrested. Thus, there were no police officers or no neighbors or no public service workers to go into crying, shaking, and victim mode for. No audience, no one to perform in front of in order to get attention. So she just stayed in self-centered, violent, cold, dictator and controller mode for this conversation, as well as blame deflector mode. As a dad, she put me in a difficult position when she, as my wife, went after my baby girl. Her response is not an apology, not okay, I'll get help, but a cold, quote, "She should learn her place," close quote. There's that, once again, putting people in place, keeping people in check, keeping people in line. That's a control freak. Anytime something was out of her control, she would freak out and panic. Right now, because I don't live under the same roof as her, I am existing outside of a world that she can control. And so now she's using the courts and the social services. And unfortunately, the only ones who are useful to her are the people in Anoka County because they're radical nutcase feminists. But I guess pushing and using a curtain rod, those are definitely the right discipline method in her world. Although she's selling herself now as a person who doesn't even believe in corporal punishment. You see, when she's in front of the community, when she's in front of social services, when she's in front of the church, all of a sudden, she doesn't believe in corporal punishment. And I'm the bad guy that went too far with the kids. You see, in this conversation with her in the clips, though, I'm firm on my stance that nothing justifies her doing what she did on that date. And she responded to me by saying, as the clips say, quote, "Yes, it does." Later on, I tell Kathy that she was pushing my daughter, but Kathy, with all evil in her voice, said, quote, "I didn't get to push her until later on."
I didn't get to push her until later on.
Manipulative. What could it be? She admits to pushing my daughter. Assault against a minor. Child abuse. How much more evidence do we all need to hear before the scales come off of our eyes and we wake up to the truth that we've been had? That Kathy's not a nice person, but rather a person in desperate need of help. I was her husband. She made a vow in the sight of God to love me, the way that He's commanded. And she hurt me. She pulled knives on me. She beat me with chairs, with baseball bats. I'm testifying in the sight of God that it happened that way. My daughter became her stepdaughter. She had an obligation to be a mother to her. She hurt her. All right? Who else is Kathy going to hurt? How do I know it's going to happen in the future? Because the core underlying issues that led up to her violence against myself and Gabrielle have yet to be addressed, and they're still there. They might be buried, and her outward behavior might be conforming to what she thinks people want right now. She's somewhat good at that for the most part. She wears a nice face in the public square. But see, once the spotlight of social services is off of her, those issues that have yet to be dealt with are still going to resurface. Didn't she have to go to some kind of counseling as part of the divorce process and as part of the child protection process? She went to a kind of counseling, but it's one for women who have been battered by men and who have to get over it. You see, it's part of the victim, it's part of the attention, it's part of the Munchausen, so to speak, that she hasn't been officially diagnosed with, but more than one person who's never met each other has told me, I think she has Munchausen. Look how many times she brings the kids to the emergency room for nothing. She's always trying to get some kind of attention, even if it's just to feign some kind of illness, even if it's just to feign or pretend that she's had something bad happen to her. You see, the bad news, though, is that one day when all of this stuff resurfaces, and it will, because it's part of who she is, my babies might be with her when that happens. My little Jamie, who she's already suffocated and slapped, so far that I know of. We've got to mobilize as a community, as tax-paying citizens, and stand up to the crooked court system and the crooked social services that shouldn't even exist, or at least exist, but now with this kind of power and influence. We got to rescue my babies immediately. The next clip, I'm on my knees in the kitchen before my wife. Listen to the first disc. I'm begging, I'm crying, I'm pleading for the violence to stop. I'm weeping like from today I'd call myself a wuss. I sound like a child. But I'm in a desperate and seemingly inescapable situation during the time that was recorded. And it's escalating with the passage of time, getting worse and worse and worse. And everyone I reach out to, policemen,